Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf tzadi hey. We're going to get started with the very bottom of tzadi dalet amabet with a story. Ha'u tabcha. So we're talking, just to remind you, we're in the topic of a person selling items or giving items to a non-Jew who may sell it to a Jew. So we started in the Mishnah with the Gita and Hashem. We said it depends on what it is, and we also talked about last class that we're talking about a city where the butchers, for the most part, are Jews, and the Gentiles are the storekeepers, as are Jews, and therefore the assumption is most of the meat anyone is selling is actually kosher meat. Today is going to be another interesting daf with some concepts that come up in a lot of other dafim of Shas, like we'll get to the 9 stores and majority, and a very famous law of Rav of basar shenit alei min ha'ayin, which is meat when you didn't see it and maybe it got switched, and even though it's still in the same place it was before, could be it's not the same meat, and we'll talk about how we perceive this halacha of Rav. So we start with ha'u tabacha. There was a butcher, the amar le lechavre, and we're going to see, he said to his friend, we're going to see, it wasn't really his friend, he was a fellow Jew, but they weren't really friends, they were kind of enemies. And he said, kind of taunt him, if you had appeased me and made peace with me, milo safelach mishor shel patam de etmol. I had this great shore yesterday. I would have shared it with you. I would have given you this great piece of meat. Too bad for you that you didn't make peace with me. Amar le, well, the friend said back to him, well, I didn't eat your meat. I had a really good steak last night. Delicious. Amar le menalach. So he said, well, actually, maybe today even. It doesn't matter the days, right? He said, and as I slaughtered it yesterday, this great piece of meat, I would have given it to you. He said, I already have from a really good piece of meat. Amar le menalach, where'd you get such a good piece of meat? He's a slaughterer. He wants to know, who's my competition? Amar le de zavin ploni goy. There was a non-Jew who bought it. V'safele, and he gave it to me. Amar le, so comes the butcher, the slaughterer, and says, Trey avade, I actually had 2 animals yesterday, the one I was offering you, and another one. Hahu, the second one, trei fahave, the second one I gave to that non-Jew. I sold it to him, and it was a treifa. And he's basically mocking him and saying, in the end, you ate non-kosher meat. Okay, so I'm a Rebbe. Rebbe says, now, here we have a situation where someone ate non-kosher meat because they got it from a Gentile, and comes Rebbe and he says, Bishvil shoteh zeh, sh'asa shelo kahogen, anu ne'esol kol ha'makolin. We're not going to go and just start making all the butcher shops not kosher, in other words, all the ones sold by non-Jews, just because of this one guy, this one foolish person who did something wrong. In other words, he shouldn't have sold the treifa to the non-Jew. But it doesn't mean that we're going to now say no one can buy from a non-Jew because it might be a treifa. And in fact, Rebbe L'Tameh, he goes according to his own opinion, to Amar Makolin v'Tavchei Yisrael. If there is Makolin, that's butcher, like the stores. Why are they called Makolin? Because Makel is a stick. They used to hang the animals on sticks. V'Tabachei Yisrael, and if the majority of the slaughterers are Jews, Basar nimtza biyad goy mutar, any meat you take from a non-Jew, that's again raw meat, we'll talk later about cooked meat, but we can assume it's kosher. Okay, so basically Rebbe thinks, even though maybe once in a blue moon somebody does something like this guy, but normally we don't have to worry about it. And because of someone's inappropriate behavior, we're not going to forbid, right? Assume this probably was also the typical way that meat was sold. Maybe the Jews were the slaughterers, and the butcher shops were non-Jewish stores. But some people have a different version of the story. That Amar Rebbe's response is, and here we're going to see there was a different actually understanding of what the comment by the kind of obnoxious guy was. Oh look, I had 2 pieces of meat, and one I sold as a treifa. So some people say that Amar Rebbe mipnei shoteh zeh di'ikaven l'tzaure lechavre, that all he's doing is just trying to annoy his friend and upset him. Meaning, what? Okay, and let's finish the sentence. Just because of that, anu ne'esor kol ha'makolin, we're not going to go forbidding all the stores just because this guy lied and said. Now we're going to see that he really didn't sell the non-Jew treif meat. He just said, oh, I sold him too, right? He said, oh, where'd you buy it? As soon as he answered where he bought it, he said, oh, by the way, I sold that guy treif meat yesterday. Just to get him upset. He didn't really. He was just saying it. So now, because of people who say stupid things, oh, what, we're going to go now forbid because, maybe people will think he's telling the truth, and then there's going to be there's a concern that there'll be non-kosher meat. So, and just so that, or say it like this, just so that people don't make fun of other people in that manner. Okay? Now, according to this, what's the reason why Rebbe said we're not going to go forbidding all the other non-kosher stores? Tamadi kavin l'tzuri l'chavre, because he was trying to make fun of his friend and upset him. But halav hachi, but were it not for that, and had he really sold treif meat, it would be usser. Now, that, instead of now bringing Rebbe's statement, which we did in the previous version, to support him, this actually comes to the opposite conclusion. That if he had actually sold non-kosher meat to the non-Jew, then it should be forbidden. We should really forbid all these shops based on even just one person's action, because then a Jew might end up eating non-kosher meat. Now, that seems to contradict the statement of Rebbe that we saw in the previous section. V'hatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita, Rebbe Omer makolim v'tabachei Yisrael, basar nimtza biyad goy mutal. Right, but there it says in the Braita, the makolim, right, stores owned by non-Jews, and the butchers are Jews. If there's basar nimtza biyad goy, it's permitted. So he permitted this. So why would he now be saying it's forbidden? To which they say, Shani hacha de'it chizak isuha. In our case, again, it wasn't really our case. In our case, he wasn't really serious. But had he been serious and he really sold it, we would have forbidden it. Now, why would we forbid it? Because there's chezkat isser here. This is a case where we know somebody sold treif meat. So then we have to worry that maybe he sold treif meat to 20 different non-Jews who were selling across town. So that's a problem. But if there's no reason to suspect, then we don't have to forbid it. Okay, so two different versions of what Rebbe said in reaction to the story, and both had kind of a different reading of the last line of the story and what the meaning was. Was he serious or was he not serious? Okay, now we get to Rav's statement that I mentioned in the introduction to the class. Amar Rav, Basal kevan shenitalem min ha'ayin asul. Meat, if it leaves your eye, your vision, okay, your right, literally nitalem min ha'ayin, it disappears from sight, okay, it's forbidden. Now, what's going on here? So Rashi explains that there's a concern in the next Rashi, in Nimtza biyad goy shane. It kind of says in the next section, next line, but it's here, which is Shema orvim chilfuhu. He's worried that a raven came by, picked up the piece of meat, took it, dropped it somewhere else, or ate it, and picked up a different piece of meat and dropped it back here. Okay? For example, I have a tree, a shesek tree. If you don't know trees in Israel, I think it's called a loquat tree. Had it grow? Because my neighbor has one, and all of a sudden one day I saw a tree growing. Okay? I mean, obviously it was growing slowly, but I didn't even notice it till all of a sudden one day I realized there's a tree that grew here. Now, how did it grow? Because the birds are constantly taking the pits from the neighbor, dropped them, and eventually it took seed, took root, and grew. Okay? Now, birds do that. Okay? The Rambam says it could be all sorts of creatures, shratzim, creepy crawlers, okay? Could be all sorts of reasons that someone moved the meat and put a different piece of meat in its place. Now, it seems a little sketchy, right? Adla had a piece of meat, there's another piece of meat still in its place, to really think that it's some other piece of meat. And there's a debate a little bit about whether this is just some chumrah of Rav, or he meant it really lahalacha, okay? So, Rav says, as soon as you weren't looking at it, it could have disappeared, it could have been taken, and this new piece of meat is in its place, and you might be eating. Now here, you have to remember, we're talking about a place where most of the people are most of the slaughterers are Jewish, so what are we worried about? But because it's a bird, and that's why Rashi's opinion has a lot of strength, it's a bird can fly far, and could go to a nearby city where most of the slaughterers are non-Jews, and could bring a piece of meat, you never know. So he forbids it. Now we're going to bring 4 difficulties from Tannaitic sources on what he said. Meitive. The first is the statement of Rebbe that we just saw. Rebbe Omer, makolim v'tabachei Yisrael, basar nimtza biyad goy mutal. Now, if you find meat from a non-Jew, right, who's to know where it came from? Maybe it got switched with another piece of meat. Shouldn't we be worried about that? To which the Gemara says, no, nimtza biyad goy shane. Nimtza biyad, right? What's the concern? The concern is maybe the non-Jew switched it with a non-kosher piece of meat. But they say, no, nimtza biyad goy, the goy is watching it. He's making sure he knows his meats, he knows which meat he can sell to the Jews, he knows what's kosher, he knows what's not, we can trust him. Okay, Tashma, next one. Tesha chanuyot, here's the famous 10 stores, really. 9 stores, kulam mechrot basar shchuta. Okay, so this is actually 9. So of 9 stores, right, there's 9 stores that all sell kosher meat. Echad mocher basar nevela, and 1 store that sells non-kosher meat. V'lakach me'echad mehem ve'eni yodea me'ezeh mehem lakach. Now, a person bought from one of these stores but doesn't know where they bought it from, so they went into a store, but they now can't remember which of the stores. Did they go into the kosher store or the non-kosher store? Sveko asur. If they're not sure, they can't eat it. Even though 9 out of 10 stores are kosher, this is what we call kol kavua kemechza mechzadami. Anything that is stationary, meaning the store is where it is, the meat was where it is. I came in and took it out. I either went into a kosher store, I went into a non-kosher store. It's 50-50 chance, even though it's not really, right? It's 9/10 that I bought kosher. But since it's kind of like a yes and no question, did you go into that store? Did you not? And the piece of meat is the same, is where, is in its place. So that's called, we go with a 50-50, and therefore, since it could be, I bought non-kosher, just as equally as I bought non-kosher, just as equally as I bought kosher, we're not going to allow me to eat it. However, and this is the important part, b'nimtza halacha charov. This is the way we always understood the case, that what? If I find it, let's say these 9 stores are in a shopping center, and in the middle of the shopping center I see a piece of meat. At this point, I'm allowed to eat it because I can follow the majority and say, it came from one of these stores. Statistically speaking, 9 out of 10 stores are kosher, we can assume it's kosher. Just like I can go to the non-Jew because I can assume that you must have gotten from a Jewish butcher. Now, what's the problem? Well, if it's sitting there in the middle of the shopping center, nobody was watching it, so how do we know that it wasn't switched with a piece of meat from a different shopping center where 10 of the stores are all not kosher? What do we know? So they answer, Hachanami b'nimtza b'yad goy. We're assuming that the piece of meat came from, it's not nimtza, it was just sitting in the middle of the shopping center. It was in a bag sitting next to a non-Jew who was watching the bag. Okay, you just can't tell me where it came from, but it came from one of the stores, we just don't know where, but he's with it. So it's not like a bird could have come and taken it away or any other switch could have happened. Tashma, third source. This is a Mishnah in Machshirin. Matzah babasal. Okay, now we have a city that's 50-50, Jews, non-Jews, or some sort of mixture of Jews and non-Jews. Now, the parentheses, imchai, if it's raw, okay, they take it out, but that's what it means. Halachacha rov tabachim. So you find a piece of meat, this could be the same problem. It sounds like you just find it on the street. You go by, it doesn't matter what the inhabitants of the town are, goes by who slaughters in the town. So if it's mostly Jews, it's kosher. In mevushal, but if it's cooked, I told you we get back to cooked, halachacha rov ochle basal. We go by the majority of meat eaters because now we have to go by how many inhabitants are in the town. Is it more Jews or more non-Jews, right, in terms of cooking? Because if it's cooked by a non-Jew, it's not going to be kosher. So when it's cooked, that's a different story. But anyway, what interests us is the raw meat. Now, if you're going to say, maybe again, it was in the hands of a goy, mevushal halacha, it doesn't make sense for the second part. Mevushal halacha rov ochle basar. If I find cooked meat in the hands of a non-Jew, we don't go by what's the percentage of people in town that are Jewish or non-Jewish. We go by nechzei id goy nakitle, id Yisrael nakitle. We just go with, was the meat in the hands of the Jew or the non-Jew? Whoever's holding the meat is probably the one who cooked it. So that doesn't make any sense. Therefore, they're going to answer, okay, we have a different answer here. So we can't say the non-Jew was watching it the whole time. But we can say, because again, that doesn't work with the second part of the Mishnah. But what we have is a piece of meat that's found in the city. It's a raw piece of meat, but it's held by a non-Jew. But the Jew is watching it the whole time. The Jew sees the non-Jew has the piece of meat, and he's watching it, and he sees that no bird came and took it, okay? Now, what we're seeing here probably is it fell from the person. Okay, it probably fell out of their bag, and then this person, the person's gone, they can't find them. But the Jew saw the meat the whole time, so he knows that no bird took it away, and then he knows it doesn't come from a different town, and he's allowed to eat it. Okay, Tashma, fourth source. This is a Mishnah in Shkalim. In Shkalim, they talk about if you find meat near the temple, and it's cut up into chunks, okay, by limbs, Now, then you can assume it's a korban ola, because if you find it in the temple area, they always cut up the ola into evarim, into a leg, the arm. If you remember, those are the parts they would burn of the korban ola. They would cut it up into pieces, nitachim, right, and then they would put them on the altar. But if nimtza bigvulin, but if you find meat cut up into these by limb, there's going to be two ways. You can either slice the meat, okay, slices, or you can have it in limbs. Now, if you find it outside of Jerusalem, evarim nivelot. If you see them as full limbs, people don't sell meat that way. They don't eat meat that way. They usually just throw it out. Why would they throw it out? If the meat wasn't kosher. So if the meat's not kosher because the animal just died, then they'll throw it out, and that's evarim. Okay? If they find it in the form of evarim, limbs, nevela. Okay? Chatichot mutarot. If it's cut up in slices, it's permitted. V'chitim, now what's the problem? If you find meat that's cut up in slices, how do you know it's kosher? How do you know a bird didn't take it from somewhere else and move it and switch it and take it from a different town? How do you know? Maybe it got here. Forget about switching it, right? Bird brought it in from the nearby neighborhood. Now, if you're going to say, look, you found this piece of meat, as soon as it fell from someone's bag, you saw it and you were watching it, like we said in the previous case, evarim nivelot amai. Then why would the evarim be called nivelot? Okay, it doesn't make any sense, because what is a nevela? Let's talk about a nevela. Nevela, the assumption is, why is it in the middle of the ground here, the floor? Because somebody was throwing it away. But if it just dropped out of someone's bag, like we mentioned in the previous case, and the Jew was just watching this and saw it, but let's say couldn't return it, well then, why is it a nevela? The assumption it's a nevela because someone left it there and didn't want to deal with it. But if someone drops it out of their bag or something like that, and we've been watching it the whole time, that's not a nevela, right? Nevelas just get dumped. So that's the question. We can't say it's omevu ro'ehu, and then this should be basar shenit alem and ayin. Who knows where this meat came from? So now they say, okay, we're going to answer this question, but they're going to answer by kind of asking a question. Midi hutama ela Rav. Isn't this difficulty against Rav? Well, this Mishnah in Shkalim, Ha'itmar Allah, was said about this Mishnah that Rav Amal mutarot mishum nevela, v'Levi Amar mutarot ba'achila. We're going to see now that there was a machlok at Rav and Levi about this Mishnah. Now, we thought it meant it was a nevela. It was really a nevela, like an animal that died. But nevela has two things to it. One is it's forbidden to eat, and two is it carries impurity. So when Rav read this Mishnah, he said, it's mutarot mishum nevela. It's not really a nevela. It's forbidden to eat like a nevela is forbidden to eat, but it doesn't have impurity to it. Why is that? It's exactly Rav. It's basar shenit alem and ayin, because you don't know where this meat came from. And Levi apparently disagrees with this issue of basar shenit alem and ayin, meat that you didn't see, doesn't think it's an issue at all, and he says you can even eat it. Okay? So now we see, first of all, that Levi disagrees with Rav about this whole thing, about meat that you lost sight of, and that Rav rereads this Mishnah to say exactly what his opinion is, which is, it's not a nevela, but you can't eat it because of this chumrah. Rav. Now we're going to. So after we have four difficulties on Rav from Tanaitic sources, we now go back and and point out something about Rav. Rav lav beferish itmar. Rav actually didn't say it explicitly. We infer what he believes from the following story. Rav habayativ amabra di ishtatia. He was standing by the water, by this passing. He had to pass through water of ishtatia. Chazia lahu gavra. He sees a person turning out on a bed. To have a kamachavel resha. He was rinsing off a head of an animal. Nafal minei. The head falls out of his hand into the water. Azal aite silta, so he takes a basket to kind of fish it out. Shada, he takes it out. Asik train. Lo and behold, two heads come out instead of one. So he threw one head of an animal in, and two heads come out. Amarav, avde hachinami. Now, the way Rashi explains this is, v'chi derechu shamabed chafetz echad motzei shnayim. Is that normal? That somebody loses a head, they fish it out, and they end up with two heads? Right? Like one head does not turn into two heads. It's just not the way it works. Aslinu niale. So he now forbade him to eat either of these heads because he said this animal, right, could have come from some other place. Amre le Rav Kahana, v'Rav Asi le Rav. So Rav Kahana and Rav Asi say to Rav, Di Yisura shchiche, de hetera lo shchiche? What? You're saying Yisura is common and hetera is not common? What do you mean? We're in a town where most of the animals that are slaughtered are kosher. Why are you forbidding this? Amar lehu, di Yisura shchiche tfei. He says the non-kosher ones are the much more common ones. Now, why is that? Because the water, right, you get all the surrounding areas. It's true that in our town, but I'm by the water here, and you can get from all different places. And from there, they get to the fact that since a bird can come from other places, right, a bird or some creature, meat could come from somewhere outside the city, and we should be worried about it. Now, it's not exactly the same situation. In fact, the Gemara says, "V'chi michlal amai." So what if we learn it from inferring it from the story? To which they answer, "Parvata de goyim havi." That was a port that led to a lot of non-Jewish cities, and therefore was common and were expected. Also in the water, things move very quickly. I don't talk about that, but things can move far in the water. Okay? So you could theoretically say, even though they don't say, but you could theoretically say that Rav only meant it in that case. Teda, and you should know, de ka'amar lehu isur shchichei tfei. In other words, we can even prove it, because Rav's words were, Isur is more common here. Okay? And that makes it sound like maybe he wouldn't say it in our situation. Even though people say that anyway, that Rav holds that. Ela Rav hechi achal bisra. Now, if Rav really was concerned about this basar she'nitalim and ayin, how did he ever eat meat? What? People are watching it all the time? So they say, b'shate de lo alim eine minei. Yeah, he would basically eat meat right after it was slaughtered, and he would make sure that it was watched. Ibai dema, or alternatively, b'tzayir v'chatima. This sounds like the early hachsherim. Okay, where it was bound up and stamped. Right? They would say, this has the stamp, it's kosher, right? It has a kosher stamp on it. So they would stamp it, and it would be wrapped up, and then you'd know it came in a package. V'inami b'simana. Or alternatively, they would put a siman on the meat, like this example. Ki had Rabbi bar Rav Huna mechatech le'atlat karnata. He would cut the meat in triangles, and that way they knew the kosher meat was triangles, and then they wouldn't get confused, right? Like in Israel, there's berekasim. Right, the rectangular ones are potatoes, and the triangle ones are cheese. So everyone knows. Okay, it's just known fact. Okay, of course nowadays they have so many different kinds of berekas that it already gets complicated. But in the simple days, right, that would be the basic rule. Rav havaka'azil lebe Rav Hanan chatane. Okay, now we have a story of Rav. He comes to the house of Rav Hanan, his son-in-law. Chazar mabra de ka'ate lape. As he gets to the crossing over the water, over the river, he sees a ferry boat coming right at him. Okay, it's like you didn't even call the taxi yet, and the taxi shows up. Okay, Amar mabrakate lape. Wow, the ferry's coming right to me. Yoma tova lego. This is going to be a good day for me. Okay, this is going to lead us into a whole conversation about simanim and what we call nichush. Torah says lo tinachashu. You can't look at things that happen like, the ferry came, must be my lucky day, and then make all sorts of decisions based on that. Like, I'm going to go sign my business deal today because luck is on my side. Okay? So he says, wow, this is going to be a good day. And it seems like from the continuation of the story, he said, my son-in-law is going to make me a huge feast. Azo kama bava. So he gets to his son-in-law's house. He gets to the door. Bava is a door. Odik beviza didasha. He looks through a crack in the door. Chaza chevata detalia. And he sees a big animal hanging there. Tarafa bava, so he knocks at the door. In other words, he realizes, it's true what I said. It's going to be a nice big steak meal tonight. Tarafa bavi knocks on the door. Nafikatu kule amalape. Everyone in the household goes out to greet Rav. You can imagine Rav gets there, right? It's his son-in-law's family, his daughter, right? And everyone's excited. Besides the grandfather, it's also Rav, the great Talmid Chacham. So everyone in the house comes out to greet him. Ata tabachanami. Even the butchers go out to meet him. Lo alim Rav eini minei. Rav is looking at that meat through the crack, and he does not let his eyes move from the meat. Okay, everyone's coming to say hello to him, and all Rav is doing is looking at the meat to make sure that no bird comes, takes the meat, and takes it away. This is his big halacha, right? Amar lehu, he says to them, Iku hashja svitu lu isura lebnei brat. The way you're behaving right now, you could have made my grandchildren eat forbidden meat. What were you doing? How'd you all leave this, right? It's very nice you're showing me respect. But in the end, you're going to feed my grandchildren non-kosher food. Lo achal Rav me'ahu bisra. And Rav refused to eat the meat. My timer. Okay, what's the reason? Doesn't really make sense. If it's because it wasn't watched, halo yalim. It wasn't not watched. It was watched. Rav was watching it the whole time. Ela din nachish. Maybe because he realized he was kind of punishing himself for doing nichush. Because what did he say? He said, oh, now that the fairy came, I'm sure they're going to have a great big meal for me. And of course they had a great big feast. And that's forbidden because of nichush. But it's not really forbidden. And that's what they're going to say right now. V'ha'amar Rav himself said, Kol nachash eino ke'Eliezer eved Avraham u'cheyonatan ben Shaul eino nachash. If it's not like Eliezer, the Eved Avraham, or Yonatan ben Shaul, then it's not nachash. Okay, what we're going to say here is that, okay, let's talk about their nichush. Okay, I'm just checking one little thing here. 1 second. Just the double negative is confusing me. Not like when they went in the right of like the nation son omen. Right. It's a confusing double negative. It's supposed to be if it's like Eliezer, Eved Avraham, or Yonatan ben Shaul, then that is not nichush. I don't know why it makes it sound, the simple reading sounds like it is nichush. So I'm just confused with the double negative. 1 second. Just trying to look at a commentary that can explain it better. But kol nachash. Oh, yeah, that's why. If you're not any nachash, any kind of nichush, that you're not relying on it, in the same way that Eliezer, Eved Avraham, and Yonatan ben Shaul didn't rely on it, okay? Right. Eino nachash. I guess I'm confused. It sounds like they're saying they actually did it right. Okay. Fine. But we're going to go with this. Yeah, I hope I'm understanding it right. Anyway, let's just explain what Eliezer, Eved Avraham, and Yonatan ben Shaul did. Okay, they didn't really engage in nichush because it was different. What did they do? Basically, what did Eliezer do? When I go to get water, if she says, I'm going to give you water and also your camels, then I'll know that she's the right person. Now, in the end, you could say there's 2 reasons why that wasn't really nichush. One is he didn't actually act upon that only. In the end, he acted on it based on other things he saw about her and checked out her family and all that, and only then decided. And he didn't base it solely on that sign. Or it could be also that that was the Ran says, and it's a very interesting answer. The Ran says he did it specifically. There was a reason. It wasn't just like, oh, it's my lucky day because the tree fell that way and not on top of me, or the taxi came right as I walked out the door. That would be very random. This is not random. This is, if she acts appropriately, then that means that she's the right person. Okay? And Yonatan ben Shaul also. There's also, either he wasn't, okay, this is where he said if they were going to go into their camp, it was just him and his friend, we're going to go into the camp. If we hear that, him and his nosei kilim, the guy carrying his weapons. But if they go into the camp and they're going to hear what the people say. If they hear them say one thing, they're going to know they could go out to war. If they hear them say something else, they're not going to go out to war. But it wasn't first of all, it could be Yonatan had already decided he was going to war anyway. It was just to kind of appease the person with him so that he would go along with him. And it wasn't really nichush. Or you could say that what he was doing really was he was saying that depends on their response, I'll know if they're scared. If they're scared, then we know we can attack them. If they're not scared, then not. So that's not nichush. Nichush is when it's something completely random and you say, oh, something completely random happened, that will determine whether I'm going to sign this business deal or not, or buy this house or not. Making big decisions based on silly things that have absolutely nothing to do with anything and just saying, oh, luck is on my side today. So his nichush was much more like that. So it's really not a problem of nichush. Okay, next. So it's not because of basar shenitale min ha'ayin that the meat wasn't watched. It wasn't because of nichush that he didn't eat it. Ela sudat reshut avai v'rav lo mitanya mesudat reshut. It was a sudat reshut. This was not a sudat mitzvah. It was just a pleasure meal. And Rav said, beneath me, I don't need to eat a pleasure meal. Okay, and Rashi even says, Bata michacham lama aretz ve'elu ovrim, right? Sorry, that's something else. But it's not something else. It's just not so important for our purposes. But the point is, he didn't have to eat in a Sudat Reshut. And maybe it's not appropriate for Talmidei Chachamim. They should only be eating at Sudot Mitzvah. So that's why he didn't eat meat. Okay, so we resolved why Rav didn't eat meat. We thought this had to do with Basar Shintalem and Ayin. And there was an element of it because he made sure, he said, why are you all coming out to greet me? But that's not the reason he didn't eat the meat. Okay, Rav Badik, now we're going to see different simanim that people did use, and seemingly they're okay. Rav Badik Mebabra, okay, he would say, if I'm going to go somewhere, if it's easy to get a ferry. If it turns out, I go there and I'm waiting, I'm going to decide it's just not worth my while. Okay, this happened to me recently. I was trying to book a flight, and it was impossible to get on a flight. And then I finally got one, and then while I was waiting on hold with them, someone else took the ticket. So then I said, you know what, I guess it wasn't basher. Now, it's not exactly, right? Like, I didn't make a huge effort after that. It kind of was like, okay, this just isn't going to happen. And sometimes, right, saying it's basher is a little different. It's saying, oh, I guess it was mishamayim that this didn't work out, right? That's not exactly the same thing as what we were talking about, nichush. Shmuel batik b'sifra. He would use psukim. He would open to a random page, look at the pasuk, and then, based on what the pasuk said, would make decisions. Okay, so this is like, again, sort of seen as signs from God. There's obviously a bit of a fine line between nichush and a sign from God. Rabbi Yochanan badik b'yanuka. He would ask children, what are you learning in school? What pasuk are you up to? And the child would say something, and he would base it based on that. Okay, we're going to have a story with that now. Kula shnei de Rav have a katav le Rabbi Yochanan lekadam Rabbeinu shebebavel. While Rav is alive, he was the gadol in Babylonia who moved from Israel. Rabbi Yochanan was in Israel, and whenever he'd send letters, he would say, right before the Rabbeinu in Babylonia, he would call him the rabbi of Babylonia. Kinech nafshe, when Rav died, who took his place? Shmuel. But when Rabbi Yochanan would write to Shmuel, he wouldn't write the same thing. Have a katav l'Shmuel lekadam chavereinu shebebavel. Right, before the friend of mine, our friend in Babylonia. Amar lo yediyah le'midei de Rabbi Ana. Shmuel was a little offended. He said, what? He doesn't know I'm a great rabbi? So, what does he do? Katav shadu le'ibura de shitin shnei. He writes him the list of when the leap years are going to be for the next 60 years. Wow, pretty impressive. Amar, Rabbi Yochanan said, not so impressive. Okay, I get this guy knows about the cheshbonot, and he knows about the stars and the cycles of the moon, and okay, smart about that. But doesn't mean he's a great rabbi. Katav shadole. So what did Shmuel do? He wrote back to him, Tleisar gamle, 13 camels worth, meaning if a camel were to carry, it would take 13 camels to carry what? Sfeke trefata. Okay, a list of trefot and issues like tshuvas about trefot. Okay, 13 camels worth. Obviously, there's a bit of an exaggerated story, but the point is he wrote a lot of stuff about trefas. Amar itle Rav beBavel ezel echzie. So when Rabbi Yochanan sees this, he's impressed. He says, "Wow, there's a rabbi in Babylonia. I got to go meet this guy." Amar leili yanuka psokli psukayach. So he says to the student, the child, "Go tell me what pasuk are you up to." Well, the kid happened to be in Shmuel, Sefer Shmuel. Amarle u'Shmuel mate. And he says, he gets up to the pasuk exactly at that moment where Shmuel dies. Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, Shma mina nach nafshei de Shmuel. I'm going to take this as a sign that Shmuel died. Vilohi. But in fact, it wasn't true. In other words, his point was, I'm not going to make the trip to Babylonia because Shmuel's dead anyway. Right? This is in the age before proper communication. You didn't know. He just took it as a sign. And it turns out it wasn't true. Lo shachiv Shmuel, he actually didn't die. Ela ki hechi de lo litrach Rabbi Yochanan. It was really mishamayim, so as not to bother Rabbi Yochanan, right? Rabbi Yochanan had lots of important things to do. He didn't necessarily need to go and visit Shmuel, and therefore he stayed put, okay, based on this story. So that was an example of asking the children. And that's how we know, when we said it before, that Rabbi Yochanan would ask the children. Okay. Just want to check one thing. Right, it was Rabbi Yochanan who said it. Yeah. 1 second. Yeah. Rabbi Yochanan badik b'yanuka. Okay, and this story shows that. Tanya. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer. Bayit tinok v'isha. We're still continuing on this reading, which is after you buy a new house, or have a child, or marry a woman. Af al pi she'ein nachash yesh siman. This is not nichush, but it is a siman, meaning if you do, let's say, a business deal right after that happens, okay, one of those three things, and you say, wow, that was a successful business deal, this is a sign that I'm going to be successful further going on, and you can act based on that. Okay? Amar Rabbi Elazar, v'hu de'it chazik tlat zimne. This is only if you have a chazaka of 3 times. Dichtiv, and by the way, it also goes for bad. Okay, if it happens poorly, then you could say, maybe I shouldn't do too many other business deals. Now, how do we know this? This we know from Yaakov. Dichtiv, Yosef enenu, v'Shimon enenu, right? When they go to send Binyamin, he says, listen, Yosef's not here anymore, Shimon's not here anymore, because, right, remember he was imprisoned. Ve'et Binyamin tikachu, and now you want to take Binyamin? If it happens to me 3 times, I'm doomed. This will be the rest of my life. Okay, so there are signs from God, but just don't engage in nichush, which is beyond that, right? Where, again, silly signs determine all sorts of things you're going to do in your life. Ba'amine Rav Huna me Rav. So Rav Huna asked Rav, we're now back to Basar Shenitalei Min Ha'ayin. B'charuzim mahu. What if it's hanging on strings? That's the way they used to hang, right, on like these strings of meat kind of hanging down. Now, the animal can't reach there, nor can they take it off the string and put it back on the string. So it doesn't really seem like there's a problem. To which Rav answers, obviously, Amar le, al tishoteh b'charuzin. Don't be foolish about these charuzin. Harei zeh siman. Of course, that's a sign that it's still there. Ika da amre, but some people say, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, b'charuzim harei zeh siman. Rav Huna didn't ask Rav. He said, in the name of Rav, the charuzim were clearly not a siman. I'm sorry, it is a siman, meaning you don't have to worry about basar that was taken by a bird. Rav Nachman min Nahardea ikle le Rav Kahana lepum Nahara. So Rav Nachman from Nahardea gets to Rav Kahana in Pum Nahara b'male Yom Kippurei on Erev Yom Kippur. Atu orve shadu kavde v'chuliata. Ravens came and dropped down livers and kidneys. Amar le shkol ve'echo. Rav Kahana said, you can go eat ha'idna. Because right now, there's more heter. Why is that? It's Erev Yom Kippur. Erev Yom Kippur, there was a mitzvah to eat. All the Jews went out and made sure, like there were tons of slaughterers, slaughtered tons of meat. It's a huge meat day in the Jewish butcher shops. But not the non-Jews. They weren't eating Erev Yom Kippur. And this day, you don't have to worry about it if ravens bring meat. Okay, even here, they actually brought the meat over. Okay, we can assume it came from a kosher butcher. Now, there's a debate about whether Rav Kahana disagrees with Rav and doesn't think there's a problem at all of Basar Shenitalei Min Ha'ayin, or he thinks it was just an exception in this case. And some people say that he really disagrees with him because Rav's was just a chumrah, and some people on that basis don't paskin like Rav. Okay? And he really held like Levi. If you remember, we had Levi in the previous section who talked about that he disagreed with Rav and said you can even eat it. Okay? So there's a bit of a debate here about how to understand this. Rav Chia bar Avin itbele karkashta beidina, or it should be beidana. He lost a piece of meat or left it between the barrels in a wine cellar, and then he came back and it was there. Ata lekamed Rav Huna, he asked Rav Huna, can I assume? Can I eat this meat? Again, it's the same kind of issue. Maybe an animal took it and brought back a different piece. Amar le ilach simana begave. Do you have a sign on it that you could tell it's yours? Amar le lo. He said no. Itlach tviat eine begave, but do you recognize it? Like, can you look at it and say, I can't tell you why, but I know that's my meat? Amar le'in, he said, yeah, that's my meat, for sure. Im ken zilshkol, so Rav Huna says, yeah, you can eat it. Rav Chanina choza'ah, same kind of story. It badle gaba de bisra, he lost a piece of the back of the animal. Ata l'kamed Rav Nachman, he goes before Rav Nachman again, he lost it here or left it somewhere. And then he comes back and it's in the same spot. Right? It obviously wasn't completely lost, just kind of left it for a little while. And then he goes before Rav Nachman, Amar le, ilach simanech begave, Amar le lo, right? Same question. Do you have a siman? Can you identify it? Identifying features? No. But ilach tviot eine begave, can you identify it? Like, do you know it's mine without giving identifying signs, but saying, I recognize that's the piece of meat that was there to begin with? Amar le'in, he said, yes. Im ken zilshko, so go, you can have it. Rav Natan bar Abaye, Iva le kibur de tchelta. Third story. Now we're going to talk about a skein of tchelet. Okay, tchelet threads. So he finds a thing of tchelet threads. Now what's the problem with tchelet? If you remember, we learned in Menachot, it could be kala ilan, which is a fake tchelet. It looks like tchelet, but it's not really. So he sees this string of tchelet that was there, right? He had one. Then he comes back and it's in the same spot. Ata l'kamed Rav Chisda. This time he goes before Rav Chisda, this Rav Natan. Barabaye, Amalei, Ilach Simana Begave. Do you have a sign on it that you could say, oh, I know this is mine because it has on the corner, blah, blah, blah? No, Amalei, lo. Ilach Tviat Eini Begave, but do you recognize it? Amalei in, he said, yes. Imkain, Zil Shkol. So go take it. So Rava says, Amarava, Meresha, Havamina Simana Adif Mitviat Eini. Originally, I thought that Siman is much stronger than Tviat Ayin. And how do we know this? Daha, from Elu Metziot and Bava Metzia, Daha Mahadrina Navedata Besimana, Velo Mahadrina Betviat Eina. I can't get back if I lost my ring, and I can't give any identifying marks to it. And basically, right, but I can say, oh, I see it. I see it's mine. It has, these, like I kind of remember it looked like that. They won't give it back to me. So I would have thought that Siman is much stronger. But now that I see that you can use Tviat Ayin even to matir meat, isurim, or tchelet, that shows that Tviat Ayin is much stronger even. That even by Tviat Ayin I can now claim this meat is kosher. That must make it even stronger. Okay, I'll stop here for today. They're going to continue in that line tomorrow. Okay, what do we have? We started with this idea of the Rebbe's statement. Really what we wanted to get to was Rebbe's statement, that we can rely on the majority. And even if, or possibly, there were two ways to read it, perhaps even if one Jew sells non-kosher stuff, we can still rely on this majority. Rov, most of the slaughterers are Jewish, we can eat it. Then we have Rav, who talked about this basar shenitaleim and ayin. We have 4 Tanaitic sources that seem to go against it. We explained each one in some way to make it work. Then we said that Rav didn't actually say that halacha explicitly. We learned it from a story. Maybe the story was just because it was in the water and it was near a lot of non-Jewish towns, and maybe it wouldn't necessarily be the same for meat, even though in the end everyone does think Rav says it by meat, but it was learned all from that story. Then we said, so Rav himself, he had different ways how he permitted meat if you have to be watching it all the time, either with a siman or with a hechsher on it, stamped on it and sealed up, or he would eat it immediately and would really keep his eye on it. Then we had the story of the when he went to the house and was making sure to watch the meat, and then we ended up with the whole thing about nichush there, because it was nichush in that story. From that we got off on a big tangent of nichush, and then we came back to what if it's hanging in charuzim, and that's clearly a siman, and then we moved from siman to this issue of tviyut ayin and recognizing, so if something is in the place where you left it, that seems to be able to override this issue, this problem of Rav basar shenitalein mina ayin. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.